Thank you all for that moment of patience. And it's wonderful to be here with you. I feel like this journey through COP26 is also allowing me to meet people that I admire greatly again, but also people that feel like I admire them so much that when we have repeated conversations, it feels like I'm meeting old friends. And the same is true with more and more of you as we meet again and again in these spaces. And the same is also true with Nora Bateson, who we are spending this evening with. So I just want to start with a super warm welcome to you, Nora, and just express how happy I am that we get to spend some time with you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And I'm really looking forward to where this is going and hearing also about your thoughts of how it's going over there at COP26.
Yeah, so maybe there's a time later when we can bring something in. I would say, at the moment, just that, the longer we're there, the more aware we become of some of the existential tensions that are in the air, especially between people from climate vulnerable countries, from emerging countries that are sometimes have large groups of climate refugees already, and water is drying up, tornadoes hitting, and not the resources to respond adequately. And on the other hand, many people from the corporate world, people from governments who are actually excited about the increase of positive intention and really excited about the way that the negotiations are going, and clear that there will be disappointment, but there's also a sense of positivity. So that would just be a few short. And tomorrow we have the big demonstration here. So 50,000 people at least are expected to arrive in Glasgow to put pressure on decision makers and business around the world to do more. And they're a big part of this situation as well. Yeah, but I want to start just by introducing you, Nora. So I hope it's okay for you to just be here in the space while I do that. So I'll say a few words about you, and then just please add everything you would like us to know as well. That could take the evening, right?
Go ahead, go for it.
So I'll just say that, Nora, you are an award-winning filmmaker, a research designer, writer, educator, international lecturer, as well as the president of the International Bateson Institute, based in Sweden. And of course, you are the daughter of Gregory Bateson. And your work asks the question, how can we improve our perception of the complexity we live within, so we may improve our interaction with the world? How can we improve our perception of the complexity we live within, so that we may improve our interaction with the world? I just love that question. And also for many of us here, that's quite close to our research, I would say. Of, quite a few of us might be familiar with the work of Thomas Hübl, and we do very similar research. And I could say more, but maybe I'll just leave it at that and go straight to the topics that we want to speak about. But I'll just pass it on to you. What more would you like to add to that?
Oh, I mean, we can add all sorts of things, or we can just basically say I'm just a human being in my complex organisms of systems of being. And I'm just trying to do the best I can to make something beautiful in this time. That's pretty much the bottom line. I think one thing that's important for me is in my work, whether it's with warm data or with in filmmaking or writing or whatever, being with my kids or my dog or being with you is just that recognition of all of the different realms of communication and information that move through us and make us into complex living systems, and that the recognition that you are complex gives me humility, gives me pause, gives me curiosity, gives me a place to begin. So I just wanted to start there.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it also has a tinge of this looking afresh, looking beyond the surface, sensing into realities. Yeah. And I feel it would also just be nice for everyone to know that I think you're calling from Sweden. Is that correct?
Yep, I'm in Sweden. I live outside Stockholm with my family, and it's not quite winter, but it's inching in on it.
Great. So I feel that, I'm just really curious about this conversation tonight, because I feel that you bring a lot of sensing knowledge around complex systems and how to research, how to explore complex systems. And I think that actually there's a lot of that both in climate change, of course, the topic of climate change, and also the topics that we research in the Pocket Project around individual, ancestral, and collective trauma and the healing process of that. And I found this beautiful quote on your website today when I was looking, and I'm just going to read it once. Or actually, I think it's in the chat now if people just want to read it with me, because it's, sometimes it's nice to read something so you can really take it in. So in the fissures, which is a word for cracks, in the fissures or cracks where the sharp edges of our fragmentation have cut through the tissue of togetherness and left it to bleed, the patterns of our perception crave play. And somehow for me, coming from the Pocket Project, where we speak about the fragmentation that is caused by trauma and how that cuts through our togetherness and is left to bleed, and how we long to play in those places and start weaving it together in different ways. That's why I was just touched by the resonance of it. And I would love to hear from you, Nora, about where this came from, this quote, what it was connected to in your world and your exploration, if you even remember. I know sometimes people find quotes of us and we think, what, did I say that? But I'd love to hear from you about that. And
I think, so I have, I grew up in a household where my father was a systems thinker. And that's what we call those people now. And that wasn't the case then, because when he began perceiving relational connection and interdependency, communication, it was prior to the Macy conferences, prior to the beginning of complexity and systems thinking at all. So it was way back. I have held this as a kind of secret something in me, because to roam through the world that we live in and to perceive those relationships that are actually there and are being trod upon and destroyed is very painful. So for a long time, I had to keep that kind of to myself. And it was very confusing, because when you're in a room where people are trying to get to the bottom of a particular subject or get to a solution, and the picture that you're seeing is one of relational process that includes much more than that thing they've isolated, then it's really easy to be perceived as not being there in support of the project or the people. And what are you there for? So I spent quite a bit of time being perceived in ways that were very confusing to me. And particularly working, like with schools or with various organizations, and things would come up and there was no way to actually have the conversation that needed to happen, because the conversation that was in place to happen was a very specific conversation directed at a corrective that was singular, isolated, and fragmented. Okay, so there's that part of it. And I think you can see how that kind of winds into this quote. But also, we live in a world in which we are trained to perceive ourselves, each other, the natural world, everything we learn about, from art to biology to history to, what is a family. We learn to perceive these reductionisms. And as those perceptions of reductionism grow, they get more and more encrusted, more and more ossified, more and more firm. And the ability that we had as children to perceive more lightly these relational flexibilities, possibilities, the connectedness between things, that ability is dissipated. So somewhere in there, I think every one of us still has that child who came into the world able and ready to perceive relational process and to play with it, right? Let's be really clear. In order to perceive in the way that we have learned to perceive, i.e. in reductionist ways, the paradox is we had to perceive in relational process. Because in order to get good grades in school, in order to perform in the world, in order to be coherent to the people around us, those are all relational baselines. In order to participate in the communities that we live within, it has been necessary to learn how to speak a language of reductionism, live in that reductionism. But somewhere inside, there is still that possibility for that kind of play. So that's kind of where that quote comes from.
Yeah, I'm just, I'm right now, I'm trying to actually perceive in myself those two perspectives, and maybe we're all here trying to do that as you speak, just trying to sense, where and how can I sense my worldview becoming reductionistic? And where can I sense it opening up into complex relational systemic sensing? And even right now here, as we listen to you, we might just notice that, yeah, different ways of listening to you. And somehow I've had a sentence in my head all day, which has come back and back a few times. So I'm just going to have to speak it out. It's just a memory of, because we moved from an eco-village in Germany to Scotland when she was 11. And there was, when we arrived, it was a huge shock for her. And also she didn't speak the language. And she said, you know, when we were in the community, I knew every tree, every animal, and every human, and they all knew me. And here, no one knows me. And with that, she meant the trees, she meant the birds, she meant the people, you know, she meant like everything. She meant the sky, she meant the earth. She felt like, you know, that sense of belonging. And there is something about the reductionism which goes together with losing the sense of belonging. I wonder about that. Yeah, so, you know, I don't know whether you want to speak to that, but I would love to hear you speak more about complexity and complex phenomenon, and how you unfold again reductionism into complexity. And then also you speak about using multiple perspective approach to looking at complexity. So can you say more about what you mean with that?
So, okay, let's start in a kind of beginning space with this, okay? And take a look at the various forms of complex systems that we live within. And we can start with the complex system that is you or me, that is each one of us as individuals, and just the complexity of yourself. Who are you? You know, what are you thinking about? How are you being? How do you live? What is the relationship between your sleep patterns and your microbiome and your diet and your kids and your parents and the history of your particular DNA, whatever. And that's a complex system. And then there's another complex system, which is the complex system of our social, cultural engagements, those systems we live within that are very complex, and they're intertwined and interdependent in ways that are I think this is one of the great sort of quests of the climate question, the ecological question, is how to get the institutional world that we live within a little bit looser so that it can shift, because right now nothing can shift. It's very difficult to make change, for example, in the educational system, when the job market is contingent upon people coming out with education that is built in that system, or parents have expectations of their children coming out with a similar education that they had, or, right? So is the problem of education really in the schools, or is it in the culture? Is it in the is it in the history? Is it in the economy? Where is it? Is it political? Is it legal? Is it intergenerational? Where's it living? So we have those two complex systems, the self and the culture, society. And then there's the other one, which is the ecological, biological complexity that we live within. And all of these are moving through you and me and all of us all day, every day. And so when we think that we can actually perceive something and get a grasp on that thing that we are perceiving. Okay, I am perceiving this cup of tea. The perception that's taking place there is nothing insignificant. Okay, this is a whole lot of cultural information. It's all sorts of historical information. It's got tea in it that was grown in the soil that needs that biological nutrition and nourishment of it was moved across the world. It's actually green tea, so it's, you know, holding all kinds of cultural information. And so one of the things that I think is really important is to stay attentive to this, to pay attention to the fact that our perception is not just about what's there. We are not necessarily perceiving what's there. We're perceiving what we're able to perceive. And that's not the same thing. And so then when we point to something and we say, we have a problem because there's this amount of particulate in the air, one of the things that's missing from that statement, that definition of a climate crisis, is the way in which each person as an individual in their family, in their relationships with each other, in their jobs, is participating in a system that's producing that particulate, but from their end of the window, what they're doing is figuring out how to live a life and be lovable and be loved and love others. And sometimes that looks like having nice, clean clothes and eating nice, fresh food and going to the gym and driving your car. And right, so we're living in a world based on relationships, and those relationships are actually holding the stuckness that we then turn to the politicians to say, can you stop this? And that's tricky. Okay, that's tricky stuff. That's not the easy way through. It would be much easier to point to all the problems and say, these are the things that have to get fixed. But to do that without being able to recognize those relational processes that are holding those situations in place into which the problems arise. Okay, most of the problems that we are perceiving are consequences of complex relational destruction. They're consequences. What happens when you solve the consequences? Well, not much. You get another round of problems. So for me, I think there's something to be said for not being afraid of the complexity that we actually have to face and be in and see within ourselves and each other and the world around us to get through this, to even get any kind of inkling of it. Alfred Korzybski, he's famous for this expression, the map is not the territory. Okay, so this comes in here, right? Most of the time, what we're doing is messing around with the map. And the map is the representation of that which we're trying to actually be involved with. So the map is not the territory. And the reason that Korzybski brought this up is because what he said is, and I think he's right, and I think it bears really paying attention to, that we're caught in a grammar, our language itself, the form and the patterns of communication are actually helping to perpetuate and create the illusions that we hold each other in, And so that's a big piece. That's a big piece. And to notice it in the language is fascinating. But the work is deep. It's not a joke to start to pay attention to that. I've been sharing this lately everywhere I go because I just think it's so interesting that there was this time, David Olson was speaking about this, when prior to when the school systems became a kind of a mirror of the factory. So we're talking just before the industrial age. And in that moment before, people were able to think in another way. And it showed in the language. And they would say something like, I'm going to the store and buying bread. I'm going outside and picking peaches. I'm going to school and I'm reading books. And then there was a shift. Okay. And the industrial process is a linear, measured, strategic end product way of thinking. And it came into the language. And now people say, I'm going to the store to buy bread. I'm going to school to learn to read. I'm going outside to pick peaches. Do you see what happened there? Because prior, you could say, I'm going outside. And to go outside is one whole possible experience. That all kinds of things could happen. And I'm going to pick some peaches. And there's another whole possible experience. I'm going to go to school, right? I'm going to go to school and I'm going to, like, all sorts of things are going to happen. I'm going to school. And I'm going to learn to read. And that's another whole thing that's going to be full of stuff, right? But when the language shifted, even in those joiner words, what happened was that things became linear. And now if you go to the store and you don't buy the bread, you failed. It was incomplete. It wasn't worth it. If you go to school and you don't learn to read, it doesn't matter that you went to school. And that's absurd. But nevertheless, this is something I think to pay attention to, because I mean, that is one example of who knows how many out there that show us how deeply the thinking of the industrial process has been steeping into our language, our way of communicating, our understanding of what it means to have a good day, to be a good person, to live a good life. And I don't know how else to start other than to say, we're going to have to start paying attention and begin to pick those open a little bit. Find out, oh, is this really what I'm thinking? Or is this thought that's seemingly driving me? Where's this thought coming from? If I was actually paying attention to a more ecological way of being, I would be able to slow down. I would be able to acknowledge and take care of those relationships. But if I'm just going to the store to buy bread, I'm going to miss that. I'm going to miss all those relational processes that are there. And therefore, I have no vocabulary for them. I have no way to talk about them. And with no vocabulary, no way to communicate about it, it's almost like I didn't miss anything because I can't even say it. But I missed everything. There's just no words for it, no existing culture of communication about that. So I'm really interested in how we perceive, how we describe what's in the language and the grammar of our being, and how there is a deep training to not see those relational necessities that actually make it possible for us to be alive together.
Wow, it's such a beautiful description of how language creates our reality or imprisons us or frees us up, and that language can be used for both. I'm just thinking of another example, which many of us might know about. At least I heard this, that languages that are connected to more peaceful cultures, like the Aborigine languages, create many more verbs.
Mm-hmm.
And other languages like English create many more nouns. And, you know, for instance, that we say, I am angry. And in other languages, they would say, I have anger moving through me.
Mm.
Just, you know, amazing how that would shift reality. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, as we look at this, you said a few words about this multi-perspective approach to complex phenomenon. And I also read this quote from your father, Gregory Bateson, where he says, interesting phenomena occur when two or more rhythmic patterns are combined. And these phenomena illustrate very aptly the enrichment of information that occurs when one description is combined with another.
Right.
And, you know, I love it. I love the thought about, you know, two humans meeting as, you know, two rhythms, and then building a complex space between them. But also, just today, we were speaking with Sandrine Dixon, the co-president of the Club of Rome, who's really here to bring to the table that the loss of biodiversity, the crisis of biodiversity loss, and the climate crisis need to be seen as two parallel phenomena that tell the same story, or the interactions between them. And I wonder whether, you know, whether you could say maybe something about both, and maybe, you know, other phenomena that you would like to compare as two rhythms and what emerges between them, the enrichment of information that occurs.
I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is that, you know, it's I think fun to look at this is through something that is sometimes called the moire phenomenon. You know about the moire phenomenon, where you have a pattern, and when you add another pattern on top of it, you get a third pattern. And sometimes you see this where you have a screen, like from a screen door, and you put it, and it makes this weird, like kind of wiggly, jittery kind of third pattern that happens out of it. So that third pattern is really interesting because it has a little bit of both patterns, but it's its own pattern, right? And I think that if you try hard, you can actually start to see a meadow that way. And you can start to ask yourself, what are the different ways in which each organism is meeting each other organism and creating this possibility for life, right? So we have earthworms that are pooping in the soil, and we have trees that are using those nutrients, and we have grasses, and we have all sorts of insects that are living on the grasses, and each one of them is living in another kind of collection or aggregate of interdependent relationships. And those interdependent relationships are crossing each other like the moire in so many different ways. Each organism is rhythmed, is flavored, is soaked, is wound, is tangled into so many other organisms. And when those organisms start to disappear, it's not that we're counting the loss of insects. Okay, this is where people get mixed up about this. What we're doing is we're counting the loss of relational interdependencies, and that's exponential. So, does that make sense? Okay, so that's, I think, what, of course, this is also a description of what we're talking about with warm data. And you know, the example that I just gave you of a school, and you want to change the education system. So you think, oh, I know, well, we'll just put a new curriculum in there. But you can't, because actually there are two or more phenomena gathering and crossing in what we know of as an education system. There are cultural phenomena. There are economic phenomena. There are political and legal phenomena. There are all sorts of, you know, intergenerational expectations. There's all these things that are crossing there, which makes it very difficult to change something in the middle. And if you try to parse out a multi-descriptive process by saying, okay, so you could, let's just use me as an example, okay? So I could get my mother to make a description of me, or I could get my kids to make a description of me. I could get you to make a description of me. I could get my high school friends to make a description of me. I could get my microbiome. I could get my colleagues, my, you know, my grandchildren that I've never met yet, right? That haven't even been born yet. So who, my tax records, or my, you know, my documentation, my doctor could make a description of me. And each one of those descriptions would be different, because they're in a different kind of relationship. They're seeing me through another context. They probably have different ways of doing describing too. Different kinds of language, different sorts of totally different approaches. Now, this is the thing, is that it's very tempting to stop there and to start to analyze these different streams of data that have come in. But that's not enough, because the real question is, how do those streams of data, how do those observers sit in relationship to each other? That is the question. So where we've gotten thus far with getting multiple description is this idea of a kind of bicycle wheel of lots of different descriptions. But until there's that lift of the next thing, where you're actually looking at how they're in conversation with each other, how they're pressuring and pushing and moving and shaping each other, you can't actually figure it out. And so this is why warm data, because this business of how multiple contextual processes come together to form, you know, any living system, me, you, a forest, a family, a society, a ocean, any living system is a multitude of contexts coming together. And it's tempting to just make a list and then stream in data from each one. But that won't give you, think of it this way. Think of a band, okay? So let's say you're listening to a group of musicians, and you know, the guitar player is playing something, and the drummer's drumming, and the singer's singing, and the horn player's playing their horn. what you're hearing is not just a guitar and a person and another person and a horn and another person and a microphone. What you're hearing is their relationship before they ever got on stage. You're hearing their relationship to their culture. You're hearing the relationship to the audience, to the day. You're hearing the relationship to, I mean, maybe they didn't get any sleep last night. Maybe they, had like the most smoking love affair of their life the night before, and they're totally jazzed. Like, the information is not just that and nothing more. There's so much more going on. And so until there is even, obviously you can't know it all. You can't grasp and collect and get all of that information. But what you can do is practice perceiving more. And even the practice of that is, first of all, it's rigorous. There's a lot of learning. But also it's, it's called warm data for a reason. It's warm, it's alive. It's that recognition that there are all these relationships going on. And suddenly it's like it goes from, black and white to color. And there's so much life pops in to view. And it may be that I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but what I do know is that I can go more humbly. I can go with more humility.
Yeah, I'm touched by this. I notice it's touching me. And I think I'm also touching on the places where I need to recognize in my life and my culture how I've been trained, for instance, to work with people in reductionist ways, where people need to function in a certain role and to approach them like that, and I'm really thankful for both the work in Thomas Hugel's field, but also I live now in the Findhorn Foundation where, the Findhorn Foundation is an old community where before each piece of work, there's an attunement where people attune to the intention of what they want to do together. And then there's a space to bring in or also to ask each other, what is happening for you right now? So and I'm just loving how that small practice, for instance, opens some of this up, what you're speaking about, just the complexity. And I wonder because, of course, being here at COP26, and on Monday we had Pat McCabe, who's a wonderful Indigenous elder from Turtle Island, and speaking about us humans needing to come back to the hoop of life and take our place where we take care of everything else that has grown before us, because everything else came before us. And kind of with humility, listen deeply to what our place is and how we can support all the other life. And then we come to COP, where it's about how much carbon and methane is now in the atmosphere, and very simple strategies. This is what we will focus on, zero net economic strategy. And we can feel how far that is from true transformation. Mm-hmm. And I hear that part of what you're speaking to, part of why you're so interested in warm data, is to unstick stuck systems. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Yeah. So how do you go about unsticking a phenomenon like humanity and all these people creating climate change together? Where do you start?
In 12 minutes or less.
Yeah. Well, I just,
No, but
if you had all the resources in the world and you could, you could tell us, all of us, 7 billion people, what to do. Just for a moment, where would you have us start?
I think for me, the most important thing is that there be mutual learning, that there is a need for a way of providing conditions for people to learn to be together in new ways. And I am 100% completely and totally against that being instructional. I am not even remotely interested in manipulating people or thinking that I know what's best or how they should behave. I think that the complexity that exists within us all is the resource, the ultimate resource of possibility. And that most of where the real change sits is beyond words. So what I'm looking at is the warm data work is really about addressing the premises, the basis from which thinking and perception take place. And so I'm not here to correct the thinking or fix the perception, but I do want to create the conditions where the premises change, so that wherever you go, you can perceive something different. But it's not for me to tell you what you should or shouldn't perceive, or what is or isn't the right direction to go. I'm really, really concerned about the anxiety that we're holding around making rapid change. And I understand that anxiety completely. But it's in itself very dangerous, because if it becomes a kind of imperialistic schema, that part of us we've been talking about all along, that deep internal complex system that's ready to play, is going to rebel. And so I think that it's really important to nurture and nourish the interior world of each person. And mostly that happens in relationships. See, that's the interesting thing. We live in such an individualistic mythology that it becomes this kind of endeavor to fix the individuals, hoping that if you fix the individuals, you'll fix the system. All right. Now that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Honestly, that was the idea behind eugenics, was that if you made more perfect individuals, if you could make more perfect specimens, you would have a more perfect society. And it's a horror story that lives there. What is there that is absolutely alive is the wilderness of what we can possibly create together that we haven't discovered yet. I don't know who I can be when I'm with you. I don't know what we might learn together. I have no idea. So the warm data lab work is about essentially giving groups of people an experience of exploration of something through a transcontextual lens. Maybe it's the idea of what is home in a changing world, through the context of politics and family and ecology and history and technology and art, and they move around. And as they do this, they start to perceive that home is not just where their laundry is. Home is where their memories are living. Home is where there is a relationship. Home is where there's a sense of peace. Home is, I mean, goodness knows, it's different for everybody. And sorry. So in that experience, there's a shift in perception. And that shift, if you can shift the perception, if there's a space where that perception shifts around one topic, it can start to shift around others. So what really happens in the warm data space is that people begin to actually perceive their own lives through different lenses. They see things they didn't see before because they're moving through these different contexts. But it isn't as though I'm trying to insert some kind of knowledge into them or put an agenda into them, or that I think I have some answer for them, or that I'm, pushing them in a particular direction any more than I would a meadow. Right? So what I'm banking the farm on, so to speak, is that there is an ecology of mind, that there is an ecology of ideas, an ecology of being that's there waiting if there is room for it. And I've just released this new piece of work that's really exciting, and I'm thrilled about it. And it's about recognizing that there's that things are coalescing. Experiences that we have each had along the way, down inside us, they coalesce and they become other things. So a lot of the time we refer to these kind of coalescences as insidious. Okay, they can take the form of sexism, they can take the form of greed, of corruption, of racism, of these ways of being. And if you ask someone, how did you become corrupt or sexist or racist? They don't really know. They had an experience and it merged into another experience and it touched with another experience and it becomes this thing. But also, I started to wonder, isn't it possible that there's some form of unseen gradual coalescence that produces vitality and not just destructive things like those? What are those unseen coalescences that we can actually begin to tend, like tending the soil for what it's possible to think? What are the unseen coalescences that can start to allow for learning, allow for vitality? So I made up a word for it, and it's really exciting. It's called Afani poesis, and Afani means unseen, and poesis is to become, and it's about how things are coming into being through unseen possibilities, and they are unseen, not hidden, not invisible, but unseen, because there's so much we can't see. Even if it's there, you can't see it. And there's a lot of possibility there. This is where, if you ask the question, how does an organism know how to evolve? Where does the information come from to get out of the patterns, the familiar, the habituated that it's in? And this is a question, right? When what we know, we repeat, how in the world does change happen? So there are things that are resting, flexibilities that are resting in unseen, unhabituated, unused materials, if you will. And so that's what we're working with right now, as kind of this new way of looking at where deep change is maybe possible to bring to communities, to bring to various forms of healing, and certainly just to recognize that there is so much there that may not have a name. It may not be within our existing realm of perception, but it's there. And it's driving us in ways we may not want to be driven.
Yeah, that was very rich. A lot of treasures somehow that you refer to. And I can feel the world becoming a richer place as you speak to it in that way. And, just to come back to the word, because I want to let it really land. So I would love you to actually write it in the chat so we
Okay,
can
I will. I will
just
do that.
exactly see how it's written.
Yes. Okay.
And then also I remember this beautiful word of autopoesis, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
Varela coined. And I'd love you to explain autopoesis just to all of us, because it's such a beautiful term. And then relate it again, just so we really all take this beautiful Afani poesis.
Okay. There we go. Coalescing in unseen ways towards vitality. Oops. Vitality. There we go.
Vitally is also nice.
Yeah, that's okay. That works. But yeah. So coalescing in unseen ways toward vitality. And
sorry, I just need to say something, because I'm receiving a lot of messages now.
oh,
And I think people are saying that it's not possible to write to everyone.
oh,
So I just want to
you can do it. Just copy paste it. You can write to everyone.
Yeah, and you have also. Now, I just want to check with Scott about this, because I think we would love to open the chat, and we would just love to ask all of you to use it sparingly so that we keep our main. Great.
There we go.
Good.
Good.
Thank you. Very good. And let's keep our main attention really with Nora and the conversation, and not in the chat. That would also be much appreciated. Yeah, so Afani poesis, and just speak again to where Afani comes from.
Afani is a word from Greek meaning unseen. And it's unseen, like shy, like hiding in the curtains, like, right, not invisible, not hidden, but unseen.
And it reminds me somehow also of the concept of Rupert Sheldrake, of how new ideas land in a field through, and then through morphogenetic field get passed on and then coalesce into a new culture. Is there a relationship there?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me is the coalescing, right? How unseen things are, like, you have an experience, and that experience, you let's say you reach out to someone and they reject you. And then you have another experience where you get dressed up and someone insults you. And then you have another experience where you're with someone and they point to the person next to you and say, oh, person is so beautiful, right? And you might, any one of those experiences might have a particular kind of, ooh, when it, if you're a little girl or something. But when you start to coalesce them, when they're coalescing, they move into this other thing. Remember, we were talking about how in a meadow, there are all these things that are coming together, right? So what's interesting is not that it's in the unconscious. Okay, fine. There's a lot of stuff in the unconscious. It's the way the coalescing is taking place. That's the interesting thing. So it's like a pre-emergence. If you want to be looking at what's emerging, that's very exciting. But by the time it's emerged, it's been cooking for a long time. So what's submerging, what's coming together long before it became emergent. And yeah, so that's sort of the Afani poesis.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So I'm going to take that word into my personal dictionary and start exploring it more in my life.
I just released it yesterday, and there's a big paper, 35-page big paper out there on it. So
on it. Wow.
Oh, yeah. Big giant, 3-course meal of a paper. Yeah.
Okay, so for those of us who like big meals, complex meals, that's the right place to go. Yeah, and with this coalescence, there was another term that I saw you use, which fascinated me, was new species of data.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear you speak about relationality and complexity, and how there is complexity and information hidden in places we don't even know to look, including within ourselves, and how it emerges when we allow relationality to create visibility, or
When you pay attention.
When you pay attention, right?
Yeah. And when I say unseen, I also mean unsmelled, untasted, unheard, untouched, right? So it's because I think what we're talking about is the ability for your senses to receive that information. What are your senses receiving? And the reason I mentioned this thing about language is that the trick of it is that there's a lot of information we're not receiving, in part because of the way we have been trained to take things in. There just isn't any receivers. There aren't the receptors for that information. So what is that information? Well, okay, let's think about that. If I want to study something that is alive, and my interest is in any way I can contributing to an ongoing, continuing vitality, what am I going to do if the information I'm using is dead? So we need information that's alive in order to respond to a world that's alive. Most of the time we generate information that is produced by pulling things out of context and then essentially killing them, taking them out of all their relationships. And then we can measure, define, control, repeat the process. And that's reductionism. And there's a lot of great information that's produced that way, but there's some information that cannot be produced that way. I mean, you can study a butterfly wonderfully when you kill it and stick it on a board, but it will tell you nothing about the meadow. And we don't understand the meadow if we don't have those relational processes. And then we think we can just reproduce the meadow. I know how to make a meadow. A meadow's got one of these and one of those and one of these and 4 of these. And it's like a recipe, we just make a meadow. And the hubris of that is the hubris of not actually recognizing that those relational processes are beyond our capacity. So that information is moving, it's alive, it changes depending on which, who is an earthworm? Let's ask that. What's an earthworm? Well, I know what I think an earthworm is. And, I've seen people put them on the end of hooks and catch fish with them. That's an earthworm. They come out in the rain and they're in the puddle. That's an earthworm. But if I'm a tree root, that earthworm is something very different. If I am the other algae and organisms in the soil that the earthworm is eating, that's another thing. If I am the plants, the grasses that are in the soil, that's another thing. And then if you're the insect who has nowhere to live, if there's no grass, who's the earthworm? You see, so there's this is kind of where we started, back in this notion of ecology, that if you are looking at an ecological process, what you're looking at is relationships that are changing. They're always responding to each other. They're moving. They're reshaping each other. And so this makes it very difficult to take a snapshot, slam on the brakes, and measure and find out everything you need to know. And by the time you know it, it's all changed. So what is information? And how do we even think about information that's alive? And so that's that. I think that this is a really valid question. And so this is what warm data is doing, is actually producing living information that's shifting, moving, changing other information. And you don't have to grab it and get it and have it, but you do have to make a place for it to move. And that movement, you were asking about how to get unstuck, that movement, a transcontextual shifting and learning, transcontextual mutual learning between groups of human beings in a forest, whatever. That's how you're going to get evolution. That's how you get shift. And it's not in the individual parts necessarily. It's in the relationships and the conditions in which those relationships are given to become learning relationships. When a tree is growing under the ground, it comes to a rock, it doesn't just stop, does it? It doesn't just stop. It's not like, oh, well, there's a rock, forget it. No, it finds a way around because it's a living, responsive organism. Okay, so when you're looking at that crooked tree in the forest and you say, why is the tree crooked? And then you start to look at all the relationships it's within. Where's the wind blowing? Where's the water flowing? Where's the bacteria? Where's the soil? Where's the birds? Where's the dogs? Where's the, right? And pretty soon that crooked tree starts to make sense. That crooked tree is learning to be in a transcontextual set of relationships. And you and me, we're crooked trees. And we're learning to be in a world that is really tangled up. And so we are trying, that little person inside of us is trying to figure out how to be. What does it mean to be healthy in a world that is so sick? What does it mean to be sane? And so, we're just trying to be in a way that we can get to the sunshine and be loved by others. And that's not really, you don't fix a crooked tree by trimming it and tying it and telling it not to be so crooked. But you could actually tend the soil. You could tend the organisms around it so that there's a possibility for it to have more light. Make room for the transcontextual mutual learning to change. Right? It's nothing. I don't know. That's my take on what we could possibly do, I think.
Yeah, it's very beautiful, on the one hand, it reminds me so much of Taoism, like the true perfection seems imperfect, yet it is perfectly itself, very beautiful. And also just how magical our life stories are. I think we all experience that, just the magic of life story, how we look back and things make sense that never made sense before, and how we grow through our lives.
This crooked tree thing, I wrote a paper about it about 10, how many years ago was it? I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe, about this mutual learning in the crooked tree. And it's just been something for me where I feel like it's always that touchstone. Because, you get into situations and suddenly that person is and you dive into this reductionist thinking, and then the response that it's possible to make is very limited. When I begin, because I'm frustrated or irritated or whatever, that person is a ... fill it in, whatever it is. And that's never gonna embody their complexity. And so if I respond only to that one, predefined pathology that I happen to witness, then I don't have the faculties of perception to actually address that person in other ways, whether it's a person or a situation, or right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel as if you're giving us the, or you're inviting us to come back to the basic tools of engaging with life in a way that breeds more life and abundance, where it's, and today I was speaking to someone also, Paul Dickinson. It's a short interview that will also come online soon, but just about these $130 trillion that have now been promised. They're kind of hovering somewhere to be invested in net zero economical development, where no one knows how these trillions, who are they going to communicate with? Where is the beautiful places where that's going to land and actually create life, and it's like it's a number, but it's very far away from that intricate creating conditions for learning relationships to grow. And it also reminds me, about the whole conversation around decolonization, where how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge topic. And those two are actually intertwined in my mind, like put the trillions on there and somehow that'll make it better, and then we see it destroying communities because suddenly money, and we can see how the lack of that learning, mutual humility and a true learning relationship, how that keeps creating more destruction instead of what you're speaking about. Mm-hmm. Which feels like there is a richness and abundance emerging from true.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were a lot of people who were hopeful in a dark way, that if there was an event that was shocking enough, that it would shock people into recognizing that they need each other. And that this movement is not into how to fix the existing system, but how to not need it. And the way to not need it is to need each other, to do it together. But it didn't happen. That the pandemic came and the pandemic rocked us all pretty hard. But still, it actually seems to have created more division. And so these things in our world that are actually generating divisiveness are prohibiting the possibility for us to be in mutual learning. And I don't know what it takes to come unglued from that. As I sit here in front of my laptop in a conversation about it, it all feels very paradoxical. And, I can giggle when we think about the hundreds of trillions of money being put into trying to make a world of no money, but I'm sitting here doing the same thing. And so, for me, it comes back to, I may not be able to, I may not be able to change the big systems, but I can actually tend to the relationships that I am in everywhere that I can, with my kids, with you, with my whatever, from my clothing to my food, to the way that I respond to, people who are upsetting. So, and I really don't mean that to sound like a micro scale, because there are these big issues. We are in big issue land now. And it's just that I got to tell you, I've been in this conversation for a long time. I grew up at dinner tables where people were having the same concerns exactly. I mean, Limits to Growth was published in 1972. Okay, I was 4 years old and my parents were talking about it at the dinner table. And basically, we're
We're the
still
same
there.
age.
Yeah. And you know, so what I'm most concerned about is that if the actual perception doesn't change, what comes from those premises is the same thinking that's going to keep repeating. And it's lurking so deeply down. You know, we're trying to make accelerated strategic change. And accelerated strategic thinking is exactly how we got into this. Right? This is what the industrial model is like, got this mantra of optimization, acceleration, high yield, strategy, linear, goals, deliverables. You got to know where it's going and you got to get there fast. And this is the thinking that got us into this. And so it feels like the craziest thing in the world to say, you know, what I said about 20 minutes ago of there is a need for there to be this deep interior rewilding. You know, you want biodiversity in the meadow, but you want it in your epistemology too. Right? And we have a monocropping of ideas going on up there that we're living in that are constantly squeezed into industrial thinking. So this is, you know, it's painful to watch because of course I want to see big change happen as quickly as possible. But do we want to do it at the expense of being in the same thinking that got us into it? Will the thinking that got us, yeah, can we? Will it even go anywhere?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just riffing now, but
yeah. No, but it's, you know, I would like to just add to this, you know, when you said you were speaking before about lurking in the depth, you use those words. And I think that comes really close to what we speak about in the Pocket Project and Thomas Hübl speaks about. And I have to say that I would love to bring the two of you into a conversation because I think that would be really interesting. But, you know, as I understand it, and as I experience it in myself, part of what is lurking in those depths is unintegrated trauma, unintegrated pain, historic trauma, and that serves like a magnetic attractor, you know, a hidden magnetic attractor in a very complex field where we keep recreating similar experiences, reenacting as an invitation to truly look, truly acknowledge the transgression of sacred law that took place. And we can start, you know, and then from that relationality of attention, as Thomas often says, from the melting of the ice, of truly looking at the pain, also the pain points, new information can arise. Like also the information about restoration, how to restore can arise. And then the energy can flow more freely. You know, that is part of the premise, I would imagine, or I would say that we work with at the moment. And I wonder how you see that and how you would relate to that.
Yeah. It's the question we were just talking about. How do you be sane in an insane world? Is it healthy to be really well adjusted to the systems that we live within? Or is it healthy to, you know, scream and yell and bang the wall and fall on your knees in tears? So it comes to the very difficult question of what is that healing? And it's not about making it go away. It's not about fixing it. It's not about taking the pain out of it. All right, the pain is a messenger. For me, it comes back to those moments in my life where I know that I have faced things that were really hard. And something my dad used to talk about too, that in those moments when you're in despair, the best possible thing to do is actually to embark on some kind of learning, really difficult, the learning that's going to stretch you. Read something hard, right? Listen to music that's very complicated. Spend a lot of time in the forest and listen to it, right? And learn how to do something with your hands. You know, study a new form of art. And because what happens is that in those moments, there is a way in which everything that you are receiving, you're receiving through all of the person that you have been in pain, but you have a new filter that it's going to come through also. And it will shift it a little bit. And so it's as though the experience gets to move through another door. It comes in through another door. And the teapot of you, where whatever it is you're in changes, it changes. So I think that that's really important to think about, that learning. And also, I don't feel like we're giving enough time to a process of recognizing that so much of the trauma that gets identified in an individual is actually not in the individual. The experience of the pain is in the individual, but actually it's a consequence, again, it's a consequence of a systemic set of conditions. And so, you know, it's when you try to fix the consequences, you're putting lipstick on the mirror, like it's the wrong level. And so there's a need to be able to have that conversation more readily, and actually not have it just kind of drop off as like, oh yeah, you know, it's hard. There's structural change that has to happen, because without that structural change, it's not at all clear that the learning has taken place. And if the learning hasn't taken place, I mean, I was talking to my family today about this moment when, you know, you tell your kids they have to be responsible for something, and they look at you like, yeah, like your generation's going to tell us to be responsible. And they have a point. And yet, here we are. No one's, you know, I don't think we can put the blame particularly in one spot or another, but in the system, it was everywhere. So how does a system learn? And I think that for me, that's the question. And it gets caught at the individual level, because we are caught at the individual level. So much of, you know, like we were saying, so much of the language is about individual. You know, we don't give a diagnosis to an institution, do we? We give it to the individuals inside the institution. That's interesting.
I think that's starting to shift. At least that's where our work is taking us, you know, more
Yeah.
collective. And you know what? I think this might be a beautiful point also to see whether there's questions also from the field.
Yeah.
Would you like that? Yeah?
I would. Do we still have time?
Oh, no, we don't. I lost time. I completely got lost in time. Is that true? What happened here? I thought we'd been going for an hour, but I look at my watch and it's been 1.5 hours.
Well, in lieu of questions, which I mean, I'm sure there's trillions because we've opened up so much. I thought maybe I would read you a poem.
Oh, that would be lovely, Nora. And everybody, I'm really so sorry. That was not my intention at all. Well, there you go. Definitely some rich space, some complex system space opened up here. Yeah. Over to you, Nora. That would be wonderful.
It's a short poem, so I won't keep you past the hour. And this is a poem from my book, Small Arcs of Larger Circles. And it's called We Are Wine. Steeped in history, building a shadowy bouquet, unable to reassemble ourselves as grapes. We're wound into a richness we cannot undo. Beautiful still, and with a destiny that's vaguely related to vines. We still know water and wind. We know the stories of the keepers of the casks. We know versions of civilizations that sing. There is goodness. A look to a future of solutions is a potion table of bubbling mysteries, soaked in folded learnings, lost threads, unseen outcomes. We are not, and yet we are grapes always. Thanks.
That is the most beautiful poem.
I hope you enjoy.
So just show us the book again so we can actually
It's
see.
a book.
It's now Small Arcs of Larger Circles. There you go, everybody. I love it. Yes, Maria.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for hanging in there. And it was really great to be with you all.